miracle than a laurel pie.
Welcome to the Golden Spike National Historic Site. It was here at Promontory Summit on May 10, 1869, that the joining of the two oceans via the Transcontinental Railroad took place. Our tour begins on the west slope, which allows visitors to travel on some 9 miles of the historic Central Pacific Grade. We begin with the last climb. In April 1869, Chinese laborers employed by the Central Pacific Railroad toiled on this stretch of railroad grade. Their hardest labors already lay as monuments behind them. In the crossing of the Sierra Nevada mountains of California and the deserts of Nevada, these men welcomed the gentle, easy approaches to Promontory, from here only 7 miles of track away. We will travel with them as they work to a final meeting at Promontory. Notice the second grade on your right and the parallel cuts ahead. They are remnants of the great railroad race to Promontory. With huge land grants and the government subsidies to be gained, both the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads strained hard to build more track than the other. In 1864, Congress authorized each company to send graders up to 300 miles ahead of its end of track. Here in Utah, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific crews actually met and passed one another with roadbeds. The result was utter duplication of effort, with grades often running within sight of one another for miles. Congress finally stopped the wastefulness on April 10, 1869, by establishing Promontory Summit as the meeting place. Thereafter, each company concentrated on reaching Promontory, the shallow valley ahead. Time has not erased the extravagance of this effort. Evidence of this parallel grading is best preserved here at the Golden Spike National Historic Site. On your right is an example of making the most of the construction materials available. As cuts were cleared, the rock was conveniently used to fill in nearby low areas. In construction parlance, this is known as cut and fill construction. This fill was abandoned when Union Pacific workers learned that Promontory was to be the meeting place and their end of track. Let's take a closer look at an unfinished cut. Impasses like this were breached in stair-step fashion. Several crews worked on a cut from opposite sides and different levels. The result was a systematic and efficient method for removing rock. This long winding grade and the Union Pacific grade on your right are testimony to the organization of the workers. Second Lieutenant Charles Currier, U.S. Infantry, one of the first men to travel on the completed Transcontinental Railroad, made this observation. I can count 500 men and 150 carts drawn by patient mules hauling dirt to the grade of the permanent track. There are plows, scrapers, and the mules are well trained. They climb up and down the bank, stop at the right place, and wait till their load is dumped. Then take their place in line and go back to get another. They look like ants. The place is black with laborers. They stand as near together as they can shovel. It's a funny sight to see 500 shovels going into the air at one time. Did you see the rock culvert in the Union Pacific grade? This and others like it were laid without mortar in 1869 and have survived the years. The grade widens here. In later years, a siding was constructed at this site so that trains traveling in opposite directions could pass. Lower priority trains, usually freights, were required to wait on a siding, while higher priority trains pulling passengers or mail continued on. Sidings were built about every 3 to 5 miles along the route. Here on April 28, 1869, the Central Pacific established a record that has never been equaled. The Union Pacific once laid 8½ miles of track in a single day and boasted that their feat could not be matched. Charles Crocker, Central Pacific Construction Superintendent, was determined to beat that record. He shrewdly waited until the distance between the two companies was so short that the Union Pacific could not try again. 10 miles, 56 feet of track were laid. It was an orchestration of humanity as magnificent as the Pacific Railroad effort itself. You are on a roadbed built of gravel, borrowed from the large excavation on your left. Routine railroad maintenance regularly required new ballast or loose rocks that held the ties in place and provided for drainage. Sources like this were of considerable importance to the railroads. You are nearing Promontory Summit, just around the bend. Imagine the jubilation felt by the thousands of workers as they laid track through here. They came some 690 miles in nearly 4 years, and the end was finally in sight. The next stop along our tour will be the Visitor Center. The Visitor Center has slide programs, films, museum exhibits that explain the significance of the nation's first transcontinental railroad, special steam demonstrations upon the arrival and departure of the Jupiter N-119. During the summer season, a variety of informative presentations are given in the shade of the tents near the last spike site. On May 10th every year, special preliminary programs and 2 reenactments of the Golden Spike ceremony are presented. Every August, the annual Railroaders Festival features reenactments of the Golden Spike ceremony, the World Champion Spike Driving Contest, hand car rides, buffalo chip throwing contest, and more. Hot food, live music, and handicraft booths are a special part of the festivities. During the last week of December each year, the annual Winter Film Festival and Steam Demonstration takes place with classic Hollywood railroad films and a special wintertime appearance by the Jupiter or the 119. Ironically, some of the most difficult track work for the Union Pacific on their line from Nebraska to Utah was here in these mountains, only a few miles from the completion site. A torturous 10 miles of track with an average climb of 80 feet per mile was laid from the valley floor to the summit of the pass. Included in the construction were 4 long fills, 4 major trestles, 5 sizable rock cuts, and numerous culverts. The Long Deep Cut was the Union Pacific's last major rock cut before reaching Promontory Summit. On the opposite sides, you can see how workers neatly stacked the rocks to keep debris out of the cuts. The Union Pacific crews began construction in the Promontory Range much later than Central Pacific. Their belated start and the difficulty of the job required shortcuts whenever possible. Here, workmen trestled across this ravine rather than completing the fill as originally planned. A culvert crew finished a lengthy stone waterway along the bottom of the ravine before the decision was made to build a trestle instead. Central Pacific builders, on the other hand, were here through the harsh winter of 1868-69. They had more time and easily completed their fill across this same ravine. Deep rock cuts like this one required specialized labor, tools, and huge quantities of explosives. Cuts were started by 2-man drilling teams called double jackers. One worker rotated a steel chisel-like star drill while the other struck it with a sledgehammer. A good double-jack team could drill a 30-inch deep hole in an hour. Look carefully, for many of these drill holes are still visible. When drilling was completed, a powder monkey filled the holes with black powder and connected each hole with fuses. Once everyone was out of the way, the charges were ignited. Great Salt Lake created a sizable barrier to the railroad. The Union Pacific entered the valley from the east through Weber Canyon into Ogden. The choice then was to go around the lake either to the north or the south. Residents of Salt Lake City pressed the railroads for a southerly route, which would bring it right through town. Planning engineers recognized the geologic evidence that suggested the northern route. Look across the valley at the level benches on the hillsides. These are old shorelines left when the lake was deeper and larger. The railroads eventually chose the route around the north end so that the line would not be endangered by rising lake waters. In view of the lake's recent fluctuations, do you think they made a wise choice? This limestone formation, known as Chinaman's Arch, has become a memorial to the thousands of Chinese who helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. Labor was scarce in California. Chinese were first employed experimentally by the Central Pacific in 1865. They proved themselves excellent workers, and soon the company recruited directly from China. By 1868, over 11,000 were employed on the railroad. Many of the Chinese remained with the company after the race to Promontory ended. Travelers often noticed their tents along the transcontinental route. Apparently, one such camp was here during the 1880s when this arch was given its special name. You are now descending the steepest mile of railroad in Utah. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 authorized construction and stipulated that the grades were not to exceed 2.2%, or 116 feet of elevation per mile. This stretch measures 1.7%, or 90 feet per mile, a hard pull for steam locomotives of the day. Yet in the entire 1,776 miles of the Transcontinental Railroad, the grade seldom exceeded 1.5%. After the line was completed, the Central Pacific stationed helper locomotives at the base of the grade to assist heavy trains up the hill. As we look across the valley to the right, you can see the two grades on the hillside. After their descent to the valley floor, they parallel Highway 83 to Brigham City. With a sharp eye, you will still be able to see them on your right if you drive into town. As we look back at the steep grade, there is a plaque commemorating the Orange Special wreck. This wreck was due in large part to the steep 1.6% grade that continues across the paved road. On the entire transcontinental route, only a short section of track near the summit of the Sierra Nevada mountains was steeper. This large single juniper tree, one of the very few trees of its kind at the Golden Spike. Original settlers to Utah mistakenly referred to this type of tree as a cedar, although there are not many trees or plant and animal life around in the park. This is one of the Golden Spike's most panoramic viewpoints. The valley before you is where the construction camps of both railroads were scattered. Junction City was located approximately 2.5 miles to the northeast, where the paved road below intersects Highway 83, just across from Thiokol Corporation's solid rocket motor plant. From this vantage point can be seen the Salt Creek Waterfowl Management Area, Bear River National Wildlife Refuge, Willard Bay Reservoir, and the Great Salt Lake. Across the valley rise the Wasatch Mountains. If you look carefully, you can trace the Central Pacific grade out across the valley toward Corinne, Utah. Many natural caves of varying sizes have formed along promontory slopes. Some of these caves were used by railroad workers as temporary housing during the final days of construction. It is likely that this cave made inexpensive quarters for some weary workers and perhaps others over the years. The approaches to both the Big Fill and Big Trestle required blasting massive cuts. However, as you come to the west end of these structures, you will notice 3 cuts instead of just 2. The left and right cuts are complete, but the center cut is only about a third finished, with stair-step construction clearly visible. When the Union Pacific discovered they would be late getting started on the Big Trestle, crews were sent ahead to begin work on the trestle's cuts. Whether due to poor communications, a surveyor's bad day, or whatever, when workers begin the west end cut, they were actually about 75 feet closer to the Big Fill than they should have been. After considerable effort had already been expended on the false cut, the error was recognized and workers shifted to the proper location. You can get a closer view of the workers' efforts on the cut's other side where it intersects the grade crossover from the Big Trestle to the Big Fill sites. As late as December 1868, Central Pacific surveyors had planned a route that would require an 800-foot tunnel to be blasted through the east face of the Promontory Mountains. Upon personal inspection of the proposed site, Central Pacific President Leland Stanford overruled the idea as being too costly and time-consuming. A new route was surveyed that would avoid tunneling but could not avoid Spring Creek Ravine. In February 1869, the Mormon construction firm of Benson, Farr & West, under contract to the Central Pacific, began work on the Big Fill. 6 months after the completion of the Pacific Railroad, Central Pacific gained control of the line from Promontory Summit to Ogden, Utah. Ogden then replaced Promontory as the terminus for both railroads, and track was removed from the Union Pacific's Big Trestle and placed on the Big Fill. Just 150 feet away from the nearly completed Big Fill, Mormon contractors Sharp and Young began building the Union Pacific's Big Trestle on March 28, 1869. Since the Union Pacific was already behind the Central in construction at Spring Creek Ravine, and completion of the Transcontinental Railroad appeared imminent, it was decided that construction speed, not sturdiness, was the goal. On May 5th, just 3 days before the scheduled Golden Spike ceremony, and only 36 days since building began, the last spike went into the 85-foot high, 400-foot long Big Trestle. The railroad was more than just an engineering feat. It was an event that captured the heart of a nation and symbolized the growth of the free society that built it. It populated the West and changed the economy of the country. In short, it brought to an end the era then called the Western Frontier.